Hey there, welcome to learning. All about learning and behavior. This is the first of several lectures. This is going to be a rather lengthy one, maybe. Uh, Depends on how well I can get through the information, because this is very basic psychology. Uh, and what this lecture will do will be to set in place the groundwork for more in-depth discussions later in this session one. So welcome to it, and let's get right with it. I'm going to talk to you about three or four people today, as briefly as I can, but I need to give you enough information that you don't get confused later on in session one when we get really into the meat of this. And you've heard these names. If you've had intro to psychology and probably developmental or whatever other psychology you may have taken already, these names will not be unfamiliar to you. But this presentation will be different because we're looking at um, what these people did, and I'm talking about people like Titchener and James and Darwin and so on and so forth. Won't talk about him much at all. However, this is a different perspective. How did we get to where we are in psychology um, in terms of behavior based on what these people did? And again, it's not going to be unfamiliar. It's just going to be a different perspective. So let's jump into it. Edward Titchener. Okay, we're talking about British, starting off in Britain, because that's basically in Europe even um, where this stuff originated. So Edward Titchener, what did he do? Titchener was a student of Wilhelm Wundt. I'm sure that name rings a bell. It should. Wilhelm Wundt is considered the father of modern day psychology. Uh, he lived. He was born in 1832, passed away in 1920, and he's the. I hate to use the word, but I will. Creator, originator. There you go, better word of the use of the scientific method in terms of studying thought. Bear in mind that we're talking about conscious thought here. We're not talking about more in-depth type of thinking that we'll get into later, not today. So Wundt in his introspection, does that ring a bell as well? Where a stimulus is presented and the immediate reaction to the stimulus is what Wundt was trying to study. So Titchener came along uh, during this introduction to the scientific method into the study of psychology, and he bought into introspection. That's Wundt's thing, uh, where you try to accurately describe your conscious thoughts, emotions, and sensations. But Titchener wanted to go a step further. He began to become interested in the structure of thinking. Uh, it's defined as uh, the study of basic elements of the conscious mind and how you combine those elements to create a more complex thinking. He termed it an experience. So, use of introspection was the way to get there. Now, there's a problem with introspection, according to Titchener. His idea was that the time element worked against the study of introspection. So when you are introduced to a stimulus and you begin to form these aspects of thought, uh, if it's not immediate or if there's a delay or something of that nature, then you're not going to get a true scientific result. And consequently, the results are not going to be what you're looking for. So he, I don't know if he really demeaned introspection, but he discounted it. and that didn't sit too well with Wundt. So Titchener went on his own. He disassociated himself from Wundt and began his studies of structuralism. Um, but again, his views and his attempts basically met with an early death. The structuralism study died out in the early 1900s. Um, the problem was its emphasis was on systematic observation. Now, that did contribute to the acceptance the acceptance of the study of psychology in the scientific world, and it did have a powerful emphasis on the conscious experience of a person, of the person involved in the study of psychology. Uh, its major effect was its influence on what later became known as behaviorism, and we'll get to that today. But we leave structuralism and we enter into William James' studies, and this is a big leap because from structuralism to William James, there were other things being done at the time. I'm not going to get into those because they're important, but these are the heavy hitters, and this is what I want you to concentrate on for the moment. Matter of fact, by the way, this is chapter 1, historical backgrounds. So William James, he's usually looked at as the founder of American psychology, not the father of modern day psychology, but the founder of American psychology. He was a Harvard guy. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, and this isn't really important, I think he was a medical doctor, but I might be wrong. Doesn't matter. At any rate, his studies became centered on the function of the mind adaptation into the world that it finds itself in. In a minute, you're going to see, I'm going to talk briefly about Charles Darwin. And the reason I'm going to bring Darwin up is not that I'm an evolutionist by any means, but Darwin's studies affected William James. So I want you to make that connection, because functionalism is based on adaptation. How do we adapt emotionally? How do we adapt cognitively to what's going on around us? And that was the study that William James looked at. Later on, James, by the way, became highly recognized as a theorist in terms of how emotions work. I wish this were an introductory class because I would talk about that. It's very, very, very important. Nonetheless, I'm having a computer problem here, so bear with me just a second. There we go. It wants to tell me that it wants to log out. It must be getting tired. Oh, well, whatever. All right, so functionalism, the study of the function of adaptation, not so much thought like structuralism or even introspection, but the study of how thought works. So, and why? Why do we have to understand how thought works? Well, it's all this Darwin thing. How do we get to where we are? There's a similarity between structuralism and functionalism, but structuralism doesn't address adaptation. And Darwin's influence on William James led him away from structuralism. By the way, sometimes you will hear that these people became, there was animosity, so to speak, between Titchener and Wundt, or James and Wundt. In essence, there was professional antagonism, not I'm going to punch you in the nose antagonism, but you know how some academicians put down others when they don't agree with their theories. I'm sure you've had readings related to that. If not, there you go, it happens. So, what happens here? James's studies uh, led us down the path, as the path had already been established, of conscious experience, conscious thoughts. All of this relates to conscious thoughts. There wasn't any ideas uh, until Thorndike and some other people came along. John B. Watson we'll talk about in a moment, about unconscious influences. Sigmund Freud, I'm not going to go into a study of Sigmund Freud right now, but Sigmund Freud's studies led psychology away temporarily from the study of conscious thought and led psychology into a musing of potential unconscious influences. I'm sure you're familiar with Freud's work. So here we are in the conscious realm, functionalism, assuming that the mind evolved to help us adapt to the world around us. And the psychologists at the time, particularly William James, thinking that this was the appropriate area of study based on Darwin's theory of evolution. And again, I don't particularly buy into that. I'm a creationist. Um, Darwin's ideas can't be dismissed, but saying that we evolved from something, I don't buy that. I think that we all believe that we were created in the image, and we didn't become human beings from amoebas. But anyway, I won't get into that discussion. Darwin believed that we evolved like other animals, and whatever. That's fine if that's what he thought. Later in his studies, he said that all of my stuff's going to be disproved. So it's kind of being done now. Maybe you didn't know that. So anyway, let's move forward. I babble a lot. Sorry. So that's basically the essence of functionalism and structuralism, and a little bit of refresher on introspection. Let me touch briefly again on this guy. The origin of the species by means of natural selection was Darwin's book. And you all know, I'm sure, what that means. It means that there's a natural selection, i.e., the strong survive and the weak perish. But there is an adaptation. So, and it's genetic according to this theory. And the stronger will procreate more profusely than the weak, and then consequently they will take over as far as the master of their classification. So, what's the point of all of that? The theory of evolution had this extreme effect on behaviorism. Initially, the functionalist school and behavior, the functionalist idea, the school of thought of functionalism, more so than structuralism, although structuralism played a role in the development of behaviorism, functionalism basically was the groundwork that was laid for behaviorism. And it led to an area of psychology called evolutionary psychology. And that's still around today, by the way. We don't touch on it a whole lot now. Well, let's jump from there into what's basically, oh gosh, I guess you could say it's one of the heavy areas of psychology introduced by John B. Watson. Watson basically developed behaviorism almost on his own. He was highly recognized, and he was a little bit, well, they say he was flamboyant. I think probably the word arrogant would fit here. So, but his ideas were very sound. How do we how do we determine why you behave the way you do? Uh, and this word empirical has to be introduced. I can't see your thoughts. I can see the results of your thoughts, your behaviors. I cannot see what produces that. I can ask you, and that's psychotherapy, right? Psychoanalysis. I can ask you why do you do what you do, and then establish a connection, maybe through psychoanalysis, and then eventually psychotherapy, or in my area, counseling. We don't get that super involved with deep psychotherapy, but there's a component of that in what we do as counselors. So we have the ability and the training and the job to make connections. Why is your behavior this way? What is the thought process that leads to it? And that's what behaviorism is. Um, it's an objective kind of a view. Um, Behaviorism is viewed as a natural science approach to psychology, and its emphasis is on the study of environmental influence on observable behavior. Yay, empirical behavior. So Watson was the ringleader of that. His idea, uh, a lot of his ideas came from his work with animals, and that's okay. I mean, there's nothing wrong with working with animals, all kind of things. Some people say, well, an animal's not a human. Yeah, but there's some characteristics that you can include in both. And you can do basic things with animals to produce behaviors. So, and if you duplicate those on a higher level, then it works with human beings, right? So it's an objective experimental branch of natural science. The goal is the prediction and control of behavior. And then you can include all these therapeutic approaches that exist out there today, CBT, REBT, etc. So there you have it. A little brief wrap up, I hope, of the beginnings. Hope it wasn't too long for you, about 17, 18 minutes, and give you an idea of where we're headed with this. We're going to be talking about a lot of stuff related to behaviorism. Okay, good. All right. Hope you enjoy this, and I'll try to make them more exciting as the session goes along. Take care.